Hi, Carol here from Designer Stencils, and I'm going to show you how to do faux molding. I've used it in my own home for a chair rail, and it's a nice inexpensive way to get that crown molding or chair rail effect without actually having to hire a carpenter. I have here one of our crown molding stencils, and it's the one I've used in my foyer. I actually used it at chair rail level to create a chair rail molding, but we're going to assume that we're going to use it at the top of the ceiling right now. In your packet are 3 overlays. Part number 1, which is just the plain opening, and this is going to help you size the depth of your wood molding. Let's see, part number 2, we're going to use some shading on this to give some definition, and then some final detail with part 3. So what you have to consider is what color you want your molding to be. If you want it to be white and your wall is already white, then you're fine. You really don't need to use part 1 at all. You just need to go to part 2 and 3 and do some shading, and that will give the same effect as a white or similar colored wall or molding on your wall. Now let's just say you have a colored wall, and I'm going to use this board here today. It's one from when we used to teach faux finishing, and it has a nice pattern on there. And assuming this is the top where your ceiling meets, we're going to take our part 1, and here's the top part, and we're going to line it up right at the top where the ceiling edge is. Okay, so I'm going to tape down, lining right up the top edge. Some tape down here. And make sure that the edge of the plastic lines up exactly with the top of your ceiling. Then I'm going to take the color that I want to paint for the base color of my trim. So I'm just going to be using an Olympic satin finish. It's a slightly cream color. And you can paint in like this if you want to, or so you have a large area. What I like to do is to use my stencil as my guide, and then down here on the bottom section, make a couple of pencil marks. And then we're going to remove this stencil, and then take painter's mask and line up with those 2 lines. Make sure you burnish it really well because you don't want your paint to go underneath your mask. And I would continue this down the rest of your wall using the stencil as your template. Make little pencil marks, and then you have this all masked off. Then you can use a roller and paint. It's probably going to need several coats depending on what your base color is on your wall already. So let's get this painted, and then I'll show you how to put the detail stencil number 2 and 3 on. Okay, now I have my base color painted, and I'm going to remove my tape. Now with our stencils, we have what's called a cover sheet, and at the bottom a lot of them have suggested colors, but only use that as a guide. For this one it suggests honeycomb and camel, so those are tannish colors. If you'd rather go with grays, just pick a light to medium gray and one slightly darker to do your shading. Now for the second part of our stencil, see, this is the first part, I'm going to choose the lighter of the 2 colors. This one is camel. and put some out on my palette. Just a little bit's all I need. Now I'm going to take my stencil. It's marked number 2. I'm going to line this up at the top edge of my board, which represents the ceiling edge. And again, I'm going to take some tape and just lightly tape that down. Now, one thing to remember with this stencil is here on the edge, you want to keep the paint feathered when you get to the edge there, just so that you can be, as you shift the stencil down, you don't see a hard line. So we're going to take our stencil brush, camel paint, and see how I'm working that paint up into the bristles. It's getting off all the excess, but it's kind of storing paint right up in there that will come out eventually. And then I'm going to dab off all the extra on a paper towel. You can always add more paint, but you can't take it off once you've gotten it on here. Now, I'm going to take a dabbing motion and just lightly go across here. So that's that edge. I'm going to go along the bottom edge. Need to get a little more paint here. Wipe it all off. And I even kind of hold my stencil brush at an angle, like this. Just kind of pushing the paint upwards. Now there's a thin line here, about 1/4 inch wide. I'm going to fill that in. And then we also have one more, and this bottom edge, you'll see, actually goes right to the bottom of the off-white color that I painted. Again, I'm going to fill that one in. Now let's take a look at what we have. Now I'm going to take part 3. Again, line it up at the very top. And yes, you are going to be overlapping where you just painted some color on part 2. So I'm going to take my darker color. For this, I chose a smaller brush. Wipe. And then again, going back over these openings. It's with the darker color, but it's going to blend with the one that's already underneath there. And this is going to be enhancing the shadows. So I have one thin line up here and 3 more down here. Again, you can pounce, or since I'm filling it all in, you could do a swirling motion if you like. And I don't have to worry about paint seeping in or underneath my stencil because I'm using very, very little paint. I dab on the back of my hand See, barely any came out? That means you're ready to go. If you got paint slopping on the back of your hand, then you'd still have way too much. And then we have one more piece here at the very bottom. Now, let's show you what this looks like. And see how I've left the edge here feathered? I'm going to continue the stencil there. So I take part 2 of my stencil, line it up again with the top of my wall. But I'm encompassing some of that too. In fact, I've got quite a lot there. I'm going to move this down a little bit more. Come here so it overlaps just a little bit, about by ½ an inch. Then I'm going to take my light color and continue on from here. What you could do is take part 2 and go all the way down your one wall so it's nice and even, and then come back with your overlay number 3 and do all the dark detailed work after that. But just remember to feather your edge at the end of each repeat so that it will blend from one section to another. And there you have it.